Andrew, it's 56 long years since the disappearance of the Beaumont children from Glenelg Beach here in Adelaide, South Australia. Can I ask you, what really motivates you or drives you in your pursuit? In the time I've known you, you are obviously a person who is very spirited. You're on a crusade. You hold steadfastly to the belief that you know the final resting place of those 3 missing Beaumont children. Can you tell me what it is you'd like to see in the form of an outcome from these things that you've been pursuing so doggedly for such a long time, despite all the obstacles that people have thrown up in front of you to stop you from doing what you're attempting to do?
Yeah, I can answer that fairly well. What drives me is that my father's crimes went unpunished because he had immunity to prosecution. That so many people are protected, even pedophiles that were finally outed that worked at Channel 9. They went home on, they finished their days home on home detention with their computers and watching television and doing whatever they like, and their friends coming over and seeing them. Pretty appalling. It was very hard. You just couldn't get a pedophile convicted here in Australia anywhere up until probably the early 90s or something. But what's happening is this really does distress me. But I want to sort things out so my family can move along. There's not many that I speak to. We lost all our cousins, all the relations, the aunties and the uncles. Treat Ruth and I and Rachel like we're lepers. We're social lepers. Police hate us, never help us. And as for these horrible trolls that we have and the rubbish that they spread around, and they have a forum called Big Footy, which I was my first attempt with the internet was I put a statement into Big Footy, and I was kicked off Big Footy within about a day, which was pretty weird, and so was my sister Ruth, and we don't want to be there. But there are those that say, oh, we're greedy, we do it for the money and all this sort of thing. Everybody has to understand that the reward money for the Beaumont information leading to the recovery of the Beaumont children wasn't available, wasn't there when we started this. That came along later. That's a bit of a joke from SAPOL, because I say from experience that any case that has $1 million reward placed on it is never going to be solved. Never.
Why is that?
Because, I don't know, maybe SAPOL get the $1 million to put into their policeman's credit union. How's that? A police force that has a credit union, they could launder any money. There are criminals everywhere, but let's say if you have your own credit union, you can launder your own money. I think it's appalling. That's my opinion. But when I have the Beaumont children exhumed from their grave, when my father and Tony Munro placed them, Grant Stevens has the power to decide whether I get the reward money or not. Well, he won't give me any reward money. He'll just laugh at me like they all did, unless some police start going down for corruption. And I'm not saying Grant Stevens is a corrupt man. He might be a very honest policeman. I've never spoken to him. I have to be very careful what I say. But as long as there's $1 million reward on the Beaumont case, it'll never be solved. All they have to do is go and dig up a small patch of land and bring out the Beaumont children. But the problem is, and this is something I need to state, and this became very apparent and obvious in my lengthy interview with 2 SAPOL detectives a day before Tony Munro's sentencing for his second conviction, was that I made a stat deck to the coroner on my father's activities in 2009 after my sister Claire was found strangled in her backyard with her neck broken. And this did happen a day after she rang up SAPOL and told them she was coming in to tell them about the big conspiracy that her father and Anthony Munro murdered the Beaumont children, heard by her daughter, passed that on to my sister, to me. These are things that people may go back on and say they didn't say it, but if they didn't, I wouldn't know about it. Can lose your train of thought, but I've spent over $100,000 of my own money just trying to dig up dead children, force the hand of SAPOL. I spent $40,000 in defending an AVO that was taken out against me by SAPOL for a crime I hadn't committed, I didn't even know what it was for, and my father spent $90,000 right through to the full bench of the Supreme Court where he lost. What was all that about? We were weeks into the court case in the magistrate's court before I found out that while wearing the hooded cloak of death, when my father thought that I was my younger brother's girlfriend, while standing in front of my father's, at the end of my father's bed, wearing the hooded cloak of death in a locked room, I reached forward and seized my father's testicles and crushed them. And my father knew it was me, because a father knows his own son's grip, Your Honour. This is what can be read in a transcript. There wasn't a policeman in sight when it never happened. I can't tell you when it happened, because I worked night shift. It was a Saturday morning. I was at work until 7 o'clock in the morning. I was working from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the morning, double shifts on Saturdays sometimes, worked in a brewery. So, you know, but as for reward money and that'll never happen.
So again, you're mainly doing this to clear the family name, to give some closure, to expose who the guilty parties are?
I think I'm doing this to expose the family name. You really don't want to have a name like McIntyre. It's a curse.
Well, obviously, some of the people who you're saying are involved in the disappearance of the Beaumont children, simply due to the passage of time, they're now deceased.
They are.
They can't be brought to justice in the sense that they cannot be imprisoned for their...
My father's died.
Yes, he died in 2017.
There are no such things as a deathbed confession. Nobody confesses at their bedside. That's just in movies. Anthony Munro's keeping his mouth shut. I had no intention of having Anthony Munro prosecuted, as I told the media. Had no intention. I only did that because it was brought to my attention by John Pike, his lifetime friend, that he was still offending in Cambodia. He was paying money to stay over and sleep with the children in orphanages. That's illegal.
That was occurring in Cambodia?
In Cambodia. And I don't mean having sex with them, whatever, just sleeping in the same room. We had him extracted, put enough pressure on him, he had to come back to Australia. You know, I'm doing this because I want to see the children given a proper burial. It's too late for Nancy Beaumont, she died.
She being the mother of those 3 kids?
Yeah. The problem that the police have is my father was setting a trap for them. Well, they didn't know where the Beaumonts were buried, and I don't think they knew until I told them in my 2015 statement of where the Beaumont children are buried and how they got there. I can put it up on my Facebook page if anybody wants to read it. And then they had a problem with the interview. They wanted to know about the containers, the metal containers that my father was bitumising. We didn't have aluminium containers, we didn't have stainless steel ones. We had steel, and so he had to bitumise them. He was painting containers with bitumen to rust-proof them. They were very concerned about that and kept asking me about this. I believe that the SAPOL think that my father buried a time capsule in there, that if the Beaumont children were ever dug up or he was prosecuted, they would suffer, because everybody would know about police involvement. I think that time capsule's still there. The other thing is that I pointed out to them, and this is a likely scenario, is that when I went to Loxton, Claire and Max disappeared on the day, never went home. My father used that my mother didn't want my older sister to wear a bikini, like she was only 15 or 14 or something, and so that was his excuse for them leaving home, because Claire wasn't allowed to wear a bikini. That's pretty pedophilia, isn't it? So anyway, that's another story. But while I was away, my father went to, we think it was one of the institutions, probably Goodwood, and took 3 children out. He brought them back, showed my daughter, cut their hair, did some bleaching, bought clothes that resembled exactly the clothes that the Beaumont children were wearing, because he knows, he was with them when they died. And he paraded them around all over Adelaide. He thought it was a hell of a joke. And so that's why we have the eyewitness accounts of the Beaumont children still being seen in the streets of Adelaide. The head count that you would have to have in that well is the 3 wards of state, which were more than likely 3 of the 600 from the Goodwood orphanage, reported in the Mulligan inquiry that had a gag order put on it. It will prove that children were murdered, buried, and never reported missing. Never reported missing. This is the dilemma faced by SAPOL and other authorities. The people that are living today are covering the sins of the past. So you have 6 children in the hole, 3 of them have bullet wounds to the head, the 3 of them had broken bones and fractured skulls and that from being thrown off a cliff. Now, why don't we dig them up and see what's going on? And I will finish with that the compensation was finally paid to 10,000 elderly people that were stolen as children from England after the Second World War. This is documented in federal, and the compensation's been paid. There were 20,000 of them. Their parents came out looking for them after the war and couldn't find their own children, because obviously they were being cycled and murdered by people like my father, used for medical science. And it's documented. 10,000 people were either missing or dead by the time the compensation was paid, and these people were paid a pittance. I don't know, it could have only been maybe $10,000 each. But you see, you open a can of worms. If you dig up that well, time capsule possibility, saying exactly what happened. My father was a very clever man. There is 3 extra children in there that are not supposed to be there, and the only way you can identify who they are is 3 of them have been shot in the head and 3 of them have probably been thrown off a cliff.
So the 3 with the bullet hole
are the Beaumont children.
Yes.
That explains my sister Claire brushing the blood and the sand out of the children's hair. Head wounds. Ruth said that the boy looked like he had a broken leg or something. He also had a bloody patch on his front. Now, there was a guy called David Smith, who eyewitness account taken to police through Brian Littley, and police confirmed that David Smith did see Tony Munro in the high-end sports car with the 3 Beaumont children, confirmed.
And at that stage were the Beaumont children
alive?
They were alive.
I think that Tony Munro, because Max gave Ruth several stories, the children were playing in the sand and a judge ran over them with his car, and then he transported them in the boot of his car because he didn't want to get sand in his car, and when he opened up the boot they were dead. Does that sound like a sane person? Ruth could correct me on this, but these are 3 different theories. They were alive when he gave them a £10 note to get food from Wenzel's Bakery, and then he dropped them off at the bus stop. And they were alive when he dropped them off at the bus stop. Why would he say that? Ruth was telling me. And what I think happened was Tony Munro was playing with the kids. They knew him. Tony was a travelling salesman. I think the children's father was a travelling salesman. I'm not trying to make a connection, but my father and Tony used to go down and dive in Max's lunch time. Tony had flexible times, and swim down the beach. I think they already knew the Beaumont children very well and got into the car with Tony. I think he made a high-speed dash down to Moana or Sellex, where you could drive on the beach, and I think while he was hooning around, because he was a real petrol head, he thrashed cars, he drove at high speed. It was a bit dangerous, and seat belts hadn't been in the ordinary cars back in those days. It was Volvo that first put seat belts in a car, and so one of the kids fell out and he probably ran over the child. That'd be a phone call that came to our house or whatever, but basically I think one of the children was injured and then they had to be dispatched. They had to be murdered because they couldn't go home to their parents like that. That's what I think. And when we dig up Sapole, when we dig up the children from the sinkhole at Stansbury, well, you can either jail me or you can pay me the reward money. Maybe I might give it to charity. I don't know. I can do anything I like with it.